and thank all of you for your testimony today. And I apologize if I retread any ground that we've covered already. I was at my other committee hearing. But as you know, this is an incredible time, a very tumultuous time for dispossessed peoples in the world. Europe is still facing its largest migration since World War II, mostly because of the Syrian conflict. But also in Southeast Asia, the Rohingya have been dispossessed. And so humanitarian organizations estimate that the cost to help them would be about $434 million. The United States, I know in September, I believe, committed about $32 million. My question is, as far as you know, what other nations are helping or groups are helping, and also does the United States plan any further?
Congressman Castro, thank you very much for that question. And I'd like to start by saying that the magnitude of this crisis, as you have indicated, is so large that it's going to require many different hands to support the needs that are so evident and so urgent right now. The United States did indeed provide an additional $32 million on September 20th. On September 28th, USAID, through the Office of Food for Peace, announced an additional $6 million in assistance, and on that same day, PRM at the Department of State announced an additional, well, we didn't announce, we simply provided an additional $2.1 million. That's the end of FY17. We're going to review our funding in fiscal year 18, but we will fund against appeals themselves. The indication of $434 million in needs is a preliminary statement by the United Nations. We will be reacting to and examining actual appeals by different organizations to respond to them. But I do want to emphasize, as my colleague from USAID mentioned, we're not the only ones, and we should not be the only ones to respond to this tragedy. She mentioned that the United Kingdom has already stepped forward, but I would
add, how much have they put up?
33.5 million.
Any other European nations that have stepped forward?
Denmark provided $3.1 million, Australia $4 million, the European Union 3 million euros, Canada $2.1 million, South Korea $1.5 million, Japan $4 million, and Saudi Arabia $15 million. That's a beginning. The United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator, Mr. Lowcock, announced yesterday that there will be, in all likelihood, a pledging conference on October 23rd, and that may take place in Geneva, but actually we don't have the full details on that. I don't know that we will be ready to pledge additional assistance at that time, but we will certainly be ready to work with other governments to ensure that others come forward to help carry this burden.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
And yes.
If I could, Representative Castro, first I want to thank you for your leadership with the ASEAN caucus here in Congress. Very important entity in our relationship there at 40 years is very productive. But that gives me the opportunity to talk about the neighborhood. In my statement, I said that if this crisis is not managed and the violence brought to an end, it can have an impact on the neighborhood. Under military regimes, Burma exported refugees, illicit narcotics, trafficking victims. We don't want to revert to that, and we have been messaging with the neighborhood they need to focus on this crisis so it doesn't spread throughout the region. There's a growing potential for terrorism of an international flavor in Burma. That would spell bad news for the neighborhood. So we are working with ASEAN. ASEAN has activated its ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Program, and I believe it's only the second time, they call it AHA, only the second time they've activated this mechanism as a result of a non-natural disaster crisis. So they are providing assistance. We're also encouraging ASEAN to communicate, to encourage the stakeholders inside Burma to take the actions needed to end the violence, open up humanitarian assistance for international organization, and implement the Kofi Annan recommendations. We believe the voice, the collective voice of ASEAN could be influential in this situation.
And I probably have time for one more question, but has the United States been clear that this is ethnic cleansing? Has the State Department taken that position? Or how would y'all define it at this point?
Mr. Castro, I refer to my seniors in the U.S. government, Secretary of State, who said it has been characterized by many as ethnic cleansing. That must stop. Our ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Haley, stated that this is a brutal, sustained campaign that appears to be an effort to cleanse the country of an ethnic minority. There are separate processes underway examining the avenue of accountability. What we do know, regardless of discussions about what to call it, is that it's a human tragedy. 500,000 people on the move across the border, several hundred thousands displaced internally, and actions need to be taken now to stop the violence, deliver humanitarian assistance, as well as the efforts to hold accountable those who have perpetuated abuses and violations of international standards.
Will you permit me one more comment?
I will, Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, thank you all for your efforts. Thank you for the initial assistance to this problem. And I hope that we won't lose sight of this, even though it's in a faraway place in the world for the United States. The pace at which news and devastating news hits us now causes whiplash almost for not only Americans, but also for those of us in Congress as we deal with human tragedies. So, you know, we'll keep working with you on this.
Would the gentleman yield, Mr. Castro?
Sure.
The other thing I